All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever it is that you're coming from. My name is Uriel Epstein. I'm the Executive Director at the Renew Democracy Initiative.
And my name is Danny Miller. I'm the Director of Content and Strategy at RDI, although every time I say I'm the Director of Strategy at an organization founded by Garry Kasparov, I feel a little bit weird. Anyway, Uriel and I will be your co-MCs tonight, and we're very excited to be with you.
And so while we're sort of waiting for a couple more folks to file in, why don't you feel free to write where you're coming from in the chat? And just remember to change the to field to panelists and everyone and attendees, that is, so that folks can see where.
Believe that Uriel might be frozen, but I see some people from Monterey. I mean, it's going so quickly, it's hard to see, but frankly, it's people from everywhere around the United States. Hold on for 1 second while we resolve a technical glitch on our end. Give us all 1 second. Please do not leave. I promise you this is going to be an extraordinary event. We have some amazing pro-democracy leaders from around the world and here in the United States that will be speaking to you about how we can fight off authoritarianism both at home and abroad. And I believe Uriel is rejoining us right now.
All right, apologies. As is perfectly predictable, my Wi-Fi decided to go out at the exact second when we were starting to get moving. I apologize for that. So yeah, I've seen that in the meantime.
Yeah, there are a lot of people here. Let's just jump right into it. Why are we here, Uriel?
Right. So, all right. So first, thank you everyone for joining us. Really excited to be here. I think this is going to be an incredibly unique and fun event. And so we're here at least partially because of what happened on January 6th. There was an attempted coup, an insurrection, an effort to overturn the results of a free and fair election. And so after that, we decided to convene an emergency board meeting to figure out how we could respond positively to the biggest threat to our democracy since the Civil War.
So led by Alex Vindman, one of our board members, we launched the Renew Democracy Challenge, asking people what democracy means to them in a short tweet or video. And we've heard from thousands of people from across the United States, from across the political spectrum, from all around the world, from athletes, ambassadors, actors, actresses, sitting Congress people, and a lot of ordinary citizens telling us in inspiring and powerful ways how they relate to democracy.
And we wanted to do this event to feature some of those voices and share some ideas for renewing democracy. But first, I'll briefly introduce the Renew Democracy Initiative. RDI was founded in 2017 with a really simple mission: to defend democracy against political extremism, wherever it might arise. That's it. And we're committed to this fight and to doing whatever it takes to promote the values of constitutional democracy. But how do we do this?
Well, to us, it means returning to first principles. Now, obviously, checks and balances, separation of powers, federalism, independent judiciary, the rule of law, these are incredibly important. You learn about them in civics class. But perhaps even more important, or at least more fundamental, are the values and virtues that underpin them.
We've boiled down these values to 4 key virtues: civic duty, freedom, fairness, and opportunity.
And these values have been absolutely essential to America's success since the beginning. Of course, there's great tension among many of them. America has not lived up to them, to say the least, throughout our whole history. But when we have, our country has soared.
So the way that tonight will go is this. We'll discuss each of the 4 values in turn, and then we'll close it out with a general audience Q&A with all of our panelists. So to begin, let's talk about civic duty.
Thanks, Uriel. So first things first, what is civic duty? I think it means caring about something more important than yourself. Now, this is something that a recent occupant of the Oval Office never understood, but it means sacrificing your ambition, your self-interest for a higher cause, for the common good, for your community, for our country. And this spirit of civic duty has been part of America since the beginning. In fact, we never would have had a country to begin with without a founding generation filled with civic duty. I mean, just imagine the Revolutionary War without George Washington, Thomas Paine, Nathan Hale. And it's not just the founders. Where would America be right now without the likes of John McCain, a man who stood up for the Constitution and his fellow countrymen, no matter the risk to his reputation, his career, or even his life? Where would America be right now without public servants like Ambassador Yovanovitch and Alex Vindman, who spoke truth to power, no matter the cost to their career? And finally, let me ask you this. What would have become of American democracy without the heroes of January 6th, like Officer Eugene Goodman, who put their lives in the line to save so many others?
So, as Danny said, America wouldn't be the nation it is today without civic duty. But we have to acknowledge that there's a problem. We don't have enough people like Vindman. Sticking to your principles isn't easy, especially when you know that you're going to get attacked for it. And honestly, over the last few years, too many people have rolled over. They've folded. So now, Alex Vindman, Miles Taylor, and Congresswoman Comstock will offer some thoughts on what made them different, on what allowed them to stick out from the crowd and to stick by their beliefs. So let's begin with Alex Vindman. In 2019, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman testified before Congress in the first impeachment of President Trump. He risked his reputation and career to serve his country, famously declaring that here, right matters. Alex, you're up.
Sure. So I'm going to go retread some terrain and say a little bit more about why we started this. On January 6th, probably one of our nation's darkest days, and for many who doubted the future of this nation, I was thinking about what we can be doing to counter those messages of hate and divisiveness. So this was conceived as a rebuke to the voices of hate and division tearing our country apart. My thought was, with a message of hope, a course of uplifting, affirmational messages, what is good about America, we can renew democracy. I saw it as an opportunity to celebrate the ongoing project of a more perfect union, recognizing that we are stronger when the many form the one, the United States. Holding this rally is particularly meaningful today because we celebrate two presidents that saw public service as their highest calling. And most importantly, maybe, when the time came to pass the enormous responsibility of the office of the presidency to the next duly elected president, they did so willingly and gladly. Public service has been my life's work thus far, 21 and a half years of military service. I'm not sure if it started out that way, but I always kind of refer to it as training a muscle. And the muscle I was training in this case was trying to be a better citizen. And over the course of a couple of years, I figured out I liked what I was doing, leading a service. It was exciting. And I was contributing to something bigger than myself. And that turned out to be a lifelong enterprise, one that I share with my brothers that have at one point or another also served in the military. I think there was probably a nugget of our family's background coming here as immigrants with little to nothing, and stories of the oppression from the Soviet Union. All that together aligned to a life of public service, and frankly, in an area special, my area, which is Eurasia, working to counter Russian aggression, and something that I will continue to do in the future. I get this question asked quite often about why things happened the way they did, why I testified and so forth. To me, it was really easy. Over the course of my career, I had sworn an oath to uphold, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And to me, it was simple. I was fulfilling my duty to do so. and how many officers can claim that they knew exactly when they made a difference? So I'm very fortunate that I had that kind of experience. I think that as I look forward to my future, I know that I will continue to serve the public interest. I will continue to advocate for ethical leadership, for values-based decision making, and for those national security policies that are going to advance U.S. interests. And I frankly could take this opportunity to encourage all of the people that are listening and watching that they could also contribute. They don't have to be officers. They don't have to be in the military. There's a community service that they could perform, something that's serves something greater than themselves, adding to our effort to renew democracy. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Udo.
Alex, that was terrific. Next up, Miles Taylor. Miles was the chief of staff to the former Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. 2018, he wrote the famous anonymous op-ed in the New York Times. He was the first former senior Trump administration official to endorse Joe Biden. Miles, take it away.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for organizing this and all of you that have attended. Appreciate the introduction. Really, the only thing that makes me a Homeland Security expert is that I grew up in a house with 6 brothers and sisters. So you learn to fend for yourself in that sort of environment. So that's really how I got into Homeland Security. But in all seriousness, we opened up the event tonight talking about January 6th and what happened on January 6th. And Uriel, I'm glad you put it the way that you put it, because it affected so many people who are on this call. And in fact, that's why a lot of us are participating in this in a way that was personal. And for me, it felt especially personal because that day, I remember someone sharing with me an image on the House floor of armed agents trying to protect the chamber. And if you remember that photograph with their guns drawn, there was a desk barricading the doors to the chamber. That was the same desk I sat at in high school as a congressional page in the House of Representatives. And I knew it instinctively because we would sit there every single day and take phone calls from members of Congress to run errands around the building. That felt immensely personal to see something that for me had represented a small piece of civic duty in my life have to be pushed in front of the doors of the chamber to keep insurrectionists from storming the floor of the nation's most august legislative body to potentially overthrow our government. That was shocking to me. It made me think, in fact, I sent this to a lot of friends that day. It made me think of a quote I've used often from Teddy Roosevelt. He once said that character in the long run is the decisive factor in the life of individuals and nations alike. And that moment on January 6th was a fascinating split screen about both personal and national character. Personal character, because it displayed the president's true nature in that moment, but national character because it forced us to recognize it wasn't just one man inciting this. It was a lot of people inciting it and a lot of people willing to follow it. So my point is this: civic duty isn't just about processes. It's not just about voting. It's not just about, going to, to register or serve, on a jury when you're asked to serve on a jury. Civic duty is also about character. And it's our civic duty to recognize what the founding fathers wanted the character of our nation to be, what they assessed we should be as a country, but also to live those values in our personal life. And let me just throw out a couple of quick examples. Civility, empathy, truth. These are all things that are central to an individual's character and to the success that they might have in life. They are also essential to national character. Yet we've seen a decline in civility. We've seen a lack of empathy in our politics, and certainly truth has come under attack. So my exhortation to the group today would be that we need to get back to those things. And I'll close with an anecdote, because this was further back in time, but I think it also hits to the issue of character. I often, like Alex, get asked why I did what I did. Why did I write an op-ed anonymously and criticize the president who I was working for? There's a lot of reasons and a much longer answer, but the proximate cause was getting a phone call at 3 a.m, middle of the night, halfway around the world in Australia. And I was there for a meeting with our Five Eyes intelligence partners, our closest allies that we try to prevent cyber attacks with, terrorist attacks. I get a phone call from the White House that says, the president wants the American flags raised back up. And after I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes, I said, I'm not sure I follow. Well, what had happened is John McCain had just passed away. And our department, the Department of Homeland Security, had ordered the flags nationwide to be lowered in honor of the late senator, which is standard protocol. The president was so spiteful towards John McCain, so disrespected his character, that he wanted the flags raised back up. After some back and forth, we finally said, if the president wants the flags lowered, he should be prepared to receive resignation letters. And we didn't do it. And ultimately, John Kelly convinced him to keep the flags raised back up. Far more horrible things happened in the Trump administration. But in that moment, I jumped out of bed and I said, this is enough. People need to know that it's not as bad as it looks inside the Trump administration. It's worse. And part of the reason, the key reason, is the character of the man in charge. But I hope that in the wake of the Trump administration, we not only reflect on the character of leaders, but our own national character. It's not Washington that's broken. It's us that is broken. We need to come together at a community level to be able to rectify the damage done in the past 4 years, but also to prevent something like that from happening in the future. So when you think about civic duty, really reflect on how your own character is central to that and affects the overall character and life of our nation. So if America's going to get to our 300th birthday, I hope that we'll continue to emphasize that in our politics.
All right. Thank you, Miles. That was really insightful. And so next up is Barbara Comstock, a conservative Republican who represented Virginia's 10th district in Congress from 2015 to 2019, and on several occasions spoke out against the president, saying he was a bad role model for the Republican Party and was introducing anti-democratic elements into our political system. Congresswoman, you're up.
Good evening. Wonderful to be with you. I hope, despite all of the tumultuous events of the past few weeks and the past few months since the election, that people will really appreciate that how strong our republic is, how resilient it is, and that it will endure. And I think it's because of, you don't have to have necessarily a majority, but the key people who were in positions throughout. You look at, first of all, those 60 courts that threw out these case after case that Donald Trump made while he was going out in the public and lying about, his election. These courts, many even appointees that were appointed by Donald Trump, were rejecting in very strong language this. So I would note, as a conservative, a lot of people attacked these lawyers, thought that, the way Donald Trump talked, they were his lawyers, that would be a problem. In fact, our courts had, this was a great moment for them, and they all shot it down. Our state officials, whether it was in Georgia or in Arizona, in particular states that had Republican governors, Republican state officials that said, no, we are not going to bend to the will of Donald Trump. And now Donald Trump, despite the most bipartisan impeachment, even though he wasn't convicted, he now still has to face possible criminal charges in Georgia because you had people stand up and take action there. So I don't want people to think that our democracy is in any way fragile. That what the founders gave us was very strong. And it was wonderful for me as a conservative Republican to hear the Democrat House managers citing all this originalism and citing our founders and really kind of having a common bond. I thought they did a wonderful job, and I certainly would have voted with them. So we have demonstrated that strength, and you have left. I know people focus on, well, Donald Trump has such a strong following still. Do not mistake being very loud for having even the majority of the Republican Party. Yes, it is troubling that we only had 10 in the House, 7 in the Senate who voted for impeachment. But I think, as Mitch McConnell laid out, there is a much bigger, and I think it's a majority of the Republican Party that realizes that this is a bad actor who we don't want to have in the party. And I think among those 10 leaders in the House, the 7 in the Senate, that's where you build the future of the party, and you bring together the elements of our Republican Party. There were more women among that group. There were more minorities among that group, and some good, strong young leaders. So We need to reinforce and support those individuals who stood up and made a difference at this key point. The Republican officials in Georgia, the governor of Arizona, who kept, knocking down Donald Trump's false allegations. So I would say it's not this loud crowd, as you saw when they attacked Liz Cheney and claimed they had a majority. They had nothing near a majority. She prevailed 2/3, of the vote. Now, granted, it was a secret ballot, but that's your silent majority. So while the Freedom Caucus and the Marjorie Greens get the attention of the press, and they're on TV a lot, they aren't the people who are going to be the future leaders. So I do think Donald Trump is going to be like Sarah Palin. It's going to be sort of a flash in the pan and move away. It's ugly. But I think Republicans, particularly, I'm a conservative Republican. I got attacked plenty by Democrats. It gives me no joy to have to agree with the very people who are attacking me often. But this president brings great unanimity across the political spectrum in his assault on our institutions that he never had respect for. He never truly understood. I thought Miles' example was so apt, because it was always these petty personal things he did and never rose to that moment. So I think the people who did rise to that moment and voting for impeachment and standing up for our principles on the state level, those are the people who are going to be the leaders. And let's celebrate them at this moment when things could have, and certainly celebrate the heroes of January 6th, because we know it could have been much worse, but for those unique heroes who were there at that moment. And I hope in the in the coming days, as we see more legal problems, more civil lawsuits against the president, that we're going to get a lot more information. And for those who supported his impeachment and conviction, they will be vindicated.
All right, thank you, Congresswoman. Really appreciate it, and thank you, all three of you, for these really insightful comments. We're now going to transition to a quick 5-minute Q&A, and again, just a quick reminder to please try to keep your answers brief so we can get in perhaps more than just one question, if we can. All right. So the first question is to Miles. Miles, your anonymous New York Times op-ed was obviously a bombshell. Right? It was entirely unprecedented. But of course, there were many who said that if you felt that way, you should have resigned and then spoken out openly about what you were seeing, attaching your name to it, and that by staying in, you remained in some way complicit. How would you respond to that?
It's a really great question. And I think it's one that we've got to confront head on, really in any facet of your life where you face a moral conundrum. You got to ask the questions. And you gotta talk to people who you respect about those questions. Now, when I went to the Trump administration, people said to me, "Why are you going in? The guy is crazy." And my response, like a number of the cabinet secretaries who went in at the time, like John Kelly and others, was, "We're going in because the guy is crazy." I don't think any of us, Alex or others on the call, had any illusions about who Donald Trump was when we went into the administration. But a lot of us went in not to serve the man, but to serve the country. I got involved in public policy and Homeland Security because of 9/11. My goal was to go into that department and focus downward, 250,000 employee department, and help them prevent future attacks against this country. Instead, we found that we had to spend inordinate time focused on just one person at the top because he wanted government to be all about him. So two things were at play, and I'll wrap it up quickly, Uriel, to keep with your request. One is we had to do what we could from the inside to try to keep him in check and keep the country on the rails. We knew that if we weren't there, Donald Trump would put campaign lackeys in our places who would be totally incapable of running the government. But two, you also have to know when it's time to leave, because the point at which saying no to Donald Trump was no longer enough was the point at which we all needed to pull out our resignation letters and say, if we can't be a check on him, if we can't be the guardrails, then we've got to call this out, sound the alarm, and get out of here. And that's why I ultimately did that. And that's also why I ultimately came out under my own name, is because I felt it was very important to subject myself to that scrutiny and speak from my own voice. But I appreciate the question.
And if I could add to that, I was in Congress when that came out. And I can tell you, many Republicans said, men and women, conservative, moderate, that could have been written by us. And in fact, I remember one congresswoman said to Mick Mulvaney at the time, "Hey, are you anonymous?" And he kind of laughed, and I think that was when he was acting chief of staff, perhaps. So that could have been written by many Republicans, and it spoke to how a lot of us felt. And that's why we thank people who are in there for going in and serving.
Thank you, Miles, and thank you, Congresswoman. This is a question I have for Alex. What do you see as the role of civil servants and political appointees in influencing and curbing the worst impulses of their elected bosses? And Congresswoman, a related question, as a former elected official, what do you think your duty is to curb the worst impulses of your constituents?
For the military, it's actually pretty straightforward. We have ethical standards. We have a value set that we inculcate into our soldiers and officers throughout their entirety of the career. And those set the boundaries of what you can do. We also have an obligation to obey the lawful orders of the officers appointed over us. But if they're illegal, unlawful, we have an obligation, an equally weighty obligation to disobey those orders and report them. That what you get with a professional civil service class is you have a similar value set with, regardless of the institution and regardless of the political party, of folks that are looking to advance the U.S. national security interests. And I think there's, of course, there is an appropriate balance. We obviously need elected officials for the positions that we elect office holders to, and we want the will of the people expressed through the vote. But at the same time, we probably just need to be very careful about political appointees coming in and taking what are traditionally civil service appointments, because of those positions are supposed to transcend any particular administration. So as in everything, moderation and balance is critical. It's important. We each have our roles. Accountability for elected officials is through the vote. Accountability through for our civil servants are through other means, but we need that kind of balance between in the system.
Well, and I certainly hope we having represented a lot of federal employees, that we can have more respect for our federal employees now. And we see so many of them who are struggling inside, not just the political appointees, but these career federal employees that are very much needed. So that I often appreciated career people who would come and tell me, both when I was a staffer for my predecessor in office, as well as when I was in office, and they would tell me, we whistleblower type things, and they could tell us what was going on. And I think it's important that we continue to support them and have that respect. That was one of the most distressing parts, whether it was government shutdowns or the disrespect to the federal workforce. Now, as to constituents and how you deal with that, you owe them the truth. And so when they would come in, and I would have people from the left and the right scream and yell about either not supporting Donald Trump enough, or they felt because I supported tax cuts or different policies that instead attacking Donald Trump every day. Well, I needed to work on issues every day. You couldn't keep track of all the stupid things that he said on Twitter. But, you do have to tell people the truth and what why this or that is wrong that the president is saying. And that's why I so admire my colleagues like Adam Kinzinger, like Liz Cheney, like Mitt Romney and Ben Sasse, Lisa Murkowski, who's up in 2 years, that for that they stood up and are telling the truth to their constituents. Senator Cassidy said, hey, that's what I owe them. And he gave a beautiful statement to that effect about, he's getting censured by his Republican Party. Those people are all going to be fine, I will predict, because they're people of character who are going to do straight talking, like the aforementioned John McCain that we opened up speaking about, a dear friend.
Congressman, if I could just one last thing very quickly to foot stomp what you just said. If I could give everyone in this crowd a recommendation for how to carry what you just said into their lives every day. Yeah, y'all may not be in Washington working in the White House or in Congress, but you are the cavalry that we call in to defend public servants when they're under attack. And you need to defend those people. Congresswoman Comstock showed the courage of her convictions. Alexander Vindman showed the courage of his convictions. Many other people on this call stood up and spoke out when it was really hard to do. It's very, very difficult to do in people's personal lives. I'm sure Alex and others could talk about all the things that have happened in our personal lives since we went through this experience. But it's made so much easier when the people themselves come to the defense of public servants speaking out. We've seen too many public servants receive death threats and threats of violence, even all the way from the President of the United States in the past few years. But when the people rise up to defend our civil servants, it sends a very, very powerful message. Continue to do that. Continue to support those people who speak out, even sometimes if you disagree with them. As long as it's being done civilly, support people who are speaking out and who are under attack.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, guys. And Maz, I'm going to call you out for being the only one not wearing a jacket, but that's okay. So, all right. So,
I gotta blend in. I gotta avoid attention.
So that was great. And you know, now we're going to move on to watch the first featured video from our hashtag Renew Democracy challenge. So for those that don't know, this was a challenge asking people what democracy meant to them. And in this video, we had Jeremy, a veteran of the Iraq War, remind us how precious the right and duty to vote is and how we can never take it for granted. So here we go.
In 2005, I was in the middle of my first tour in Iraq. I was embedded with the Iraqi army as a military advisor. Because of that, I was one of the few Americans at the polling sites for the first free Iraqi elections that they had had since the fall of Saddam. What I witnessed that day, I'll never forget. The pride and joy of the adults, the emotion. I mean, some of them would cry when they'd come out voting with their ink-stained fingers. The children were so excited, they didn't even know why. And they were upset when they couldn't dip their finger in that ink. I remember standing there thinking, wow, we don't have this much excitement around our elections back in the United States. I talked to my interpreters that night, and I explained that to them, and they were just amazed that we don't get as excited as they were that day. And I explained to them, well, it's something that we've always had. Many of us take it for granted, and even those of us that do exercise our right, it's not like we're usually excited about it. If 2020 taught me anything, it was that our democracy shouldn't be taken for granted. Our elections are a very special part of our democratic process.
All right. I think Jeremy is in the audience. And I'd just like to thank you, Jeremy, for this video and for your service. You know, this video reminds me of my parents' experience coming to the US, having spent most of their lives in the communist Soviet Union. But it's also a perfect segue to our next value, freedom.
Thank you, Uriel. So, as Jeremy said in his wonderful video, we live in a free country. We have the freedom to say whatever we want. We have the freedom to publish what we want. We have the freedom to peaceably assemble, to practice whatever religion we want or no religion at all. We have freedom from government established religion. We have freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures. We have so much freedom in this country that when the government wants to take our freedom away from us, we get a whole host of new freedoms: due process, a jury trial, an attorney. And this spirit of freedom has been part of America since the beginning, even before our founding. The Pilgrims came from the old world to the new world to be free from religious persecution, and America has been a refuge for so many ever since. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that the story of freedom is complicated, because even though our country was founded on the principle of freedom, it was also founded on the backs of people whose freedoms and rights were taken from them, Native Americans and slaves. But that's not the whole story either. American history is also a story of unfree people becoming more free. African Americans through emancipation, abolition, and civil rights, women through women's suffrage, and gay Americans through the gay rights movement. And I contend right now that Americans are more free than any people ever have been.
You know, Danny's right. And I'll say I do think Danny is definitely perhaps the more optimistic one of us. But, you know, in many ways, I think we're uniquely free. And I love this quote by Bill Clinton, who said that nothing that's wrong with America can't be fixed by what's right with America. But maintaining our freedom doesn't come without challenges. Honestly, we've become so accustomed to it that we've started taking it for granted. We vote based on our pocketbook, not on the principles underlying our democracy. But if we continue to do so, we'll end up hurting both. So I'm always grateful for the chance to talk to people who, like my parents, grew up in unfree regimes. They remind us what happens if we take our collective eye off the ball for too long. That's why for this section on freedom, we've invited 3 people who have all spent time fighting authoritarianism, sometimes at incredible personal risk. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Garry Kasparov, my friend and RDI's chairman. A world chess champion exiled from Russia for taking a stand against Vladimir Putin, Garry knows what it's like not to have the freedoms that we too often take for granted here in the US. Garry.
Thank you, Uriel. Hello, everyone. When I see so many people watching and such remarkable people coming together for this rally, I can only think, if only my diehard communist grandfather could see me now. Many times in my life, I've been asked why. Why criticize the Soviet system? Why quit your comfortable life in chess to fight Putin? I admit, sometimes I ask myself, but the answer comes back to the sign that my mother, who passed away in December, put above my bed when I was a youth. The sign was a saying of the Soviet dissidents: if not you, who else? And I have always believed this means doing what is necessary, doing what is right. So this is a duty for me, because those of us with personal experience living in undemocratic countries have a responsibility to share that perspective. Those born into freedom cannot help but take it for granted. The way you take for granted clean water, broadband internet, and Tom Brady winning the Super Bowl. Democracy has always been there for many of you. Messy and inefficient, yes, but predictably unpredictable. Elections you don't know the result of in advance are a luxury. So it's no surprise that many Americans had no idea what to do when the basic democratic foundation of free elections and the peaceful transfer of power came under direct attack. Or when an American president lied constantly, openly, and used the words of Vladimir Lenin, calling the free press the enemy of the people. But to me, it sounded all too familiar. My compatriots and I celebrated when the Iron Curtain fell and when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. We pulled down the statue of the KGB founder. And then we watched in horror as just 9 short years later, a KGB agent took over the country. The fight for democracy is never over. While the American system is far stronger than the nascent Russian democracy, so easily toppled by Putin, it also meant the American immune system was naive, unprepared. I hope Trump can work as a vaccine against the virus of nationalism and populism. Now you know what to expect next time, to fight it off before it spreads, before it attacks the Capitol building. To do this, we must build institutions and strengthen regulations. But some things democracy depends upon can never be put in written law. Trust, integrity, and doing what is the best for the greater good. On this day, commemorating the birth of the founder of the nation, George Washington, recall not only his words, but what was said about him by those who knew him best. In his recollections of all the great figures he had known, Marquis de Lafayette said, "General Washington is the greatest man, for I look upon him as the most virtuous." virtue. Remember that. But even the great Washington was not perfect. We will never be perfect. America will never be perfect. But we must never stop striving to make it better and to keep fighting to do what is right. If not us, if not you, who else? Thank you.
That was truly terrific, Gary. Next up is Evan Mawarire. Evan is a Zimbabwean pastor who has been arrested repeatedly for fighting for democracy in his home country. He founded the This Flag movement to fight corruption. His courage inspires all of us, including me. Evan, we are honored to have you. You're up.
Thank you so much for having me here today. And the subject of freedom is one that I'm very passionate about. If there ever was a time that we needed to stop and ask ourselves, what is freedom? It is now. If there ever was a time as a generation that we needed to take stock of what they have done with the freedoms handed down to them, it is us. I know what it means to have one's freedom taken away, what it means to live in a brutal authoritarian regime. I know what it means to be intimidated, to be arrested, jailed, tortured, and charged with treason simply because you demanded an end to misgovernance, to injustice, and the violation of basic human rights. Yet that is what our world in general has actually trended towards. It has allowed vile figures of hate and division and mistreatment of others in our society to thrive. So what do we do? What do we do when our freedoms are threatened? We do what the men and women of old in our nations at some point have had to do in defense of their own dignity and in defense of what this moment shall inspire in the future, where our children shall live in freedom or in bondage. We stand up. We stand up because freedom is not about heroes from another planet fighting for our behalf. It is not the permission we are given to be equals with those who have more money and those who have more powerful friends than us. No. Freedom is our decision to stand up in the face of blatant injustice. Freedom is our refusal to back down when we are threatened by oppression. Freedom is our belief, coupled with action, to still speak truth to power, even when our very lives are at risk. Freedom is when our society's unity is shredded, yet we still commit ourselves to finding a way. It is when our reasons for cohesiveness are jeered and belittled, but we still seek each other out despite our differences. It is when our democracy is under attack, yet we still push back the shameless endeavors of evil agendas by being respectful to our collective laws and to our sacred constitutions. It is us. Freedom is us when we show up to defend democracy. It is us when we show up and despite the odds as ordinary individuals, knowing that a mighty river began its journey as a trickling stream. Sitting in a maximum security prison in Zimbabwe after being jailed and beaten and tortured by my own government for asking for an end to poverty and misgovernance, I thought it was all in vain and that everything we had done to stand up had counted for nothing. Yet, whilst in that jail, my biggest realization was that the more grave mistake would have been not to stand up. The biggest loss and betrayal of our democracy would have been to stay hidden, to say nothing, and hope that somebody else speaks in defiance. You see, my friends, the struggle for freedom cannot be outsourced or subcontracted. It requires our presence. It requires our sustained efforts. And it requires that we pass on the torch, because just as our forebearers were not the final frontier, we too are not the end of it, no matter what condition the torch of freedom is in. So in this moment, we must make a conscious commitment to reignite where the fires have died down. We must reestablish where the walls have collapsed. And we must renew our democracy where its stronghold has been shaken, because freedom is us. Democracy is us. Thank you for your time.
All right, Evan, that's it. I'm ready. Let's go. I don't know. I don't know where we're going, but wherever it is, I'm ready. Just listening to you and Gary, that was really terrific. And so for our final speaker in this panel is Yeonmi Park. She is a North Korean defector and a human rights activist. And having escaped from North Korea after witnessing countless atrocities, she has brought a brutal spotlight to modern concentration camps, sex slavery, and state-backed atrocity around the world. So Yeonmi, you're up.
Hi everyone, I'm so humbled to be part of this panel. I don't even know if I deserve to be here because I'm keep thinking how I'm on this panel, what I'm going to tell you about freedom and democracy. And I realized I can tell you what life really looks like when there's really no glimpse of freedom. As Uriel said, I was born in North Korea in 1993. And often people know North Korea as a country that run by one family, and the dictator has crazy haircut. But a lot of people forget that there are 25 million people like you and me are living there right now. I escaped that country when I was 13 and be sold in China as a sexual slave, and eventually I had to cross the Gobi Desert to Mongolia, and that's how I became free. But I will tell you why I escaped with my life. When I was born in North Korea, there was really no word for love or freedom or human rights. So belated happy Valentine's Day yesterday, guys. But in North Korea, there is no one single day that is dedicated to celebrate being a human. Only love that North Koreans were allowed to express and that we are allowed to know was the love that we had to express for the dear leader. I think George Orwell wrote in his book about the doublespeak, how important it is to have a vocabulary so we understand the concept. North Korea is literally George Orwell's 1984 right now. There's no word for freedom. There's no word for human rights. Therefore, when I went to South Korea for the first time, I heard of animals' rights. I was literally confused. Where on this earth right now, the people, 25 million people, do not even know they have rights as a human beings. And now we are in the world where we are talking about animals' rights. And I think this is why it's so important for us to understand what freedom is, because my mother was never told me that she loved me. And the first thing that she told me as a young girl was not being a president or not being a business person. The first thing she told me was not to even whisper, because the birds and mice could hear me. So when you don't have freedom, guys, you fear even the mice and birds, and you cannot be who you are as a human. And I think that's how much I can help you. That in North Korea right now, the most common question people ask me, why there hasn't been no revolution in their country? It's been 75 years of oppression. Why people are not rising up? And the reason why North Korean people hasn't risen up is because they don't know that they are slaves. And if you don't know you're a slave, how do you fight to be free? And when you know that what freedom is, I hope we guard it so we don't lose it forever and become like North Koreans that we don't even know what this concept is. So thank you guys for listening, and I'm very honored to be on this panel again.
Honestly, I don't even know how to react. I did not hear these speeches ahead of time, so it's taken me a moment to even think about how to pull this together. But I do think one thing that common thread amongst all three of you is that in your home countries, you witnessed the deterioration of civil rights and liberties. Now, of course, that's an insane understatement, honestly. But having all come to the US, I wonder if you could share what warning signs should Americans be worried about? And this is to any of you, to all of you.
Well, I think from my perspective, having seen certain things happen in America that happened in Zimbabwe, when you see the outright disrespect for your own constitution, and when members who are supposed to defend that constitution begin to challenge it or to manipulate it for their own personal means or gains, that's a warning sign. At that very point, people must begin to mobilize, because no matter who we are and where we come from in a nation, our constitution is our common agreement. That is the place that we have all decided that this is what defends us against ourselves or against an external enemy. And so at that very point, that is a sign to anyone, no matter who you are, no matter whether you understand the politics of the nation or not, that when the constitution is challenged by an individual or an organization, a grouping of people in our nation, immediately we must begin to mobilize and defend that constitution.
Gary or Yunmi, do either of you want to take 30 seconds approximately and respond?
Yeah. It's immediately after Trump's elections. I warned Americans that they soon would discover that the entire political system was built on a code of honor, on traditions, on customs. People didn't do things because nobody done them before, and they just, plainly wrong. And I said that Trump would definitely exploit these weaknesses because so many things were based on the spirit of the law, not on the letter of the law. And what I thought could be one real great danger from my experience of being born and raised on the other side of Iron Curtain, it's a tribalism. And the fact is that the common ground was getting very slippery. And at least one element of American political system, one wing of American political system, turned to be hijacked by a populist, by a demagogue. And I saw millions and millions and millions of people losing their critical thinking and following their dear leader. And all of a sudden, the truth is not what we learned in school, not what we heard in our families, but it's something that is being said by the leader of our group today.
So do we, so just really quickly, just because we are now definitely significantly over time, Danny, do you want to quickly transition to the last note here?
Yeah, so this is a question for all three of you, and please keep it short. We are sort of over time, just a lightning round question. All three of you came from countries where either there weren't free and fair elections, or you just didn't have elections at all. And yet tens of millions of Americans in the last election, even though it was record turnouts, did not vote. If you could talk to somebody who didn't vote, what would you say?
Danny, it's vitally important that people in a nation like America understand how not just important, but how extremely valuable their vote is. I come from Zimbabwe, where our vote has been ignored many, many times, and where the election has been rigged. And so the opportunity to be in a place where your vote actually counts, where it's actually going to be counted, is an amazing responsibility. And so it's not just a vote, it is your voice. When you vote, you have a voice, you're registering your say. And forgoing that is forgoing an opportunity to shape the future of your nation. And the people of this nation must never sit back and say, my vote doesn't count, so I'm not going to do it. It could just be the one vote that's needed to tip the nation in the direction that it needs to go.
I think everyone here could listen to you talk about democracy all night long. But Gary, what's your opinion?
It's I can just only say that 15 years ago, when I joined Russian pro-democracy movement and I was making to the streets with my friends and colleagues, so, fighting the rising KGB dictatorship, we said that our goal was not to win elections, but to have elections. It's just, having your rights to vote, it's absolutely precious. And, you just, if you don't have time to vote, just look around, look at countries like Russia or Zimbabwe or North Korea or many others in the world. And remember that 60%, at least 60% of people who live on the planet Earth do not have these rights. And if you remember that, exercise them.
And me?
Yeah, I'm coming from a country like literally North Korea. We do have an election, but there's only one person in the ballot, and it's public. They literally watch you if you vote for Kim Jong-un or not. So I think coming to America, hearing people, some people literally told me that not voting is a informal express their feelings too. But the thing is, I don't know how to even tell people how precious it is, because in North Korea, we can't even imagine that you can have more than several candidates. And I think only thing that I want Americans to appreciate is like democracy is a bit messy. It's not as clean as like a dictatorship. But I think that's what makes it great, that it's messy and stressful, but we find always better solutions when we discuss.
All right. So thank you, all three of you. And we just heard from three incredibly inspiring speakers offer a dissident's perspective on the freedom that we still get to enjoy in the US. So now let's move on to our next topic, fairness.
Thank you, Uriel. So fairness can mean a lot of different things in American democracy, but I think principally it means nobody is above the law. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how much money or power you might have. You're not above the law. That's the rule of law. It's a quintessentially American thing. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that over the past several years, this principle has come under attack from the very people who were elected and entrusted to protect it. So the question is, what are we supposed to do? How do we restore fairness? How do we restore and protect the rule of law? Well, I think it starts with accountability. And who better to talk about accountability and the rule of law than Preet Bharara, former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Preet, you're up.
Hey, folks. It's good to be here. And it's great to be with so many inspiring people who have so many inspiring things to say. I apologize that my laptop is so old that I couldn't get the background that other people have. So it's a pretty weighty, large, heavy question. This issue of fairness, it's bound up and overlaps with questions of accountability, as was said. And justice. I guess ultimately the way I think about how people view outcomes as fair is if they think two things are true. One, that the process is fair, the system of rules and regulations and the structure of the process is fair. But not only that, they have to also believe that the people who are involved in the process are fair-minded. Right? You need the laws, you need the structure, but you also need the people who are involved in the process. Otherwise, you're not going to get a fair outcome. And almost more importantly, or equally importantly, people aren't going to believe that it was fair. And as they often say in my line of work, justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. And I think lately in this country, and it's been exacerbated by certain folks, but not just Donald Trump. And I know we spend a lot of time talking about Donald Trump, but the things that we're talking about, and I think that we care about, transcend Donald Trump. And there are issues that people have with who has power and who doesn't. How are Black and brown people treated within the legal system of the United States? And also, of course, how do people in power, whether they're congressmen or governors or presidents of the United States, how do they handle their power? And are they treated to a different standard? Is there a double standard? Are there people who are above the law? And I think there have been a lot of doubts about that lately, and I think it's an important thing to talk about, and I'm glad that's a pillar of today's discussion. So in connection with one of the most brazen acts in our democracy in the last few years, and one of the reasons that we're gathering here today online, is the insurrection of January 6th. And I think there's no one who will say anything other than that was a failing of many things. It was an atrocity on our seat of government. But the question then comes, who's responsible for it? And if we go back to the issue of what's fair and what accountability means, I think you have to focus on it with clear eyes. And so, I spent a lot of my time, I guess a lot of other people maybe did as well, if you had the luxury of time, to watch every minute of the impeachment proceedings. I know there's some people who think that based on Donald Trump's, I think my view, well-proven involvement in the incitement to insurrection at the seat of our government, that an injustice was done and it wasn't fair that he wasn't convicted. I want to point out one positive thing about the events that relate to the impeachment and to the proceedings. It happens to be the case that it was a bipartisan vote for conviction in the Senate, and the most bipartisan vote in the history of the country. So, and by the way, it was a majority vote. The rules require 2/3, but 57 is not insignificant. And among that group of 57 on the Republican side were the 2012 Republican nominee, the last nominee before the former president. The #1 senator didn't vote in favor of conviction, but basically said the House Democrats had proven their point. And then another person who wasn't voting in the Senate, but who had some say in this, was the #3 Republican in the House, Liz Cheney. So is that accountability at the end of the day? No. Is that progress towards the point that I think is part of what we're doing here, of getting people from all places on the ideological spectrum and the partisan spectrum to be able to agree that some things are wrong and some things should be called out and some things are just unacceptable in America. And no matter what my tribe is, what my party is, that I will be fair in my approach and say what the truth is, that's something. So now the impeachment trial is over. The former president of the United States was acquitted. And, people wonder if it was a fair process. Notwithstanding what I said, some people think, even though that the rules were generally followed, that I don't know how much that says, because there aren't that many rules in the Senate impeachment process. As I think people have commented on before, was it fair that you had 100 senators, all of whom were potential victims of the insurrection, many of whom were witnesses to the insurrection, and some of whom arguably were fellow inciters of the insurrection? Is it fair that lots of folks in that process did not have an open mind because they had partisan interests? Is it fair that you had some jurors literally meeting with the defense lawyers for the president? So in a lot of different ways, I don't know how the American people feel about the fairness of that process, because accountability is important. You have people saying, notwithstanding the fact that the trial ended in an acquittal, should we do something more next? And I think that's a question that I don't have to answer, thankfully. In part, it'll be up to the Congress, and it'll also be up to the next leaders of the Justice Department. But I do think it is the case when people ask the question, well, we should let bygones be bygones, and not go after people who have already experienced some accountability in the House and in the Senate. I don't know that I buy that. I think the people who have been on this call and spoken in an inspiring way about standing up to power and making sure that we face our past and making sure that we face the bad things that have happened before, clear-eyed and open-minded, I think that dictates that there has to be more accountability. I don't know what form that will take. I know that Nancy Pelosi announced today her support for a 9/11 style commission, not for the purposes, I hope, of vendetta or some kind of retribution, but to get at the truth. Whatever happened at the Capitol on January 6th, and whether it was fair or not, or the accountability was done in a fashion that was fair or not, is far, far larger than the former president, and whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. And so people then ask the further question, isn't it just revenge? What's the difference between revenge and justice? And to my mind, revenge is something that should not be part of the law or part of any democratic process. Revenge is about getting even with somebody who is your political enemy. Revenge is something that arises from hatred in some part. It arises from pettiness, and it arises from politics. A political instruction from someone, you need to bring some harm to come to pass to those people who used to disagree with us politically. That's revenge, that's wrong. No further accountability with respect to the insurrection of 1/6 should have anything to do with those kinds of things. Justice, on the other hand, is something that's separate from politics and above politics and away from politics, and is not directed by politicians, and is done with a fair hand and with fair process. And I think whether it's a commission of that's founded by the United States Congress, or it's a body of people at the Justice Department, or it's some other folks, I think they need to take great care to make sure that we find out what happened on January 6th, hold everyone responsible for what happened on January 6th, but do it in a way that is non-political and not directed by politicians. And I have some faith that given how much those events affected people, no matter what their political stripe, that might be possible. The last point I'd make, echoing something that other people have said on this call, and I'm not on the level of many of the people who have acted very heroically on this Zoom call. I'm really honored to be associated with all of you, even if it's just virtually. But independence of mind and independence of spirit is incredibly important to democracy and also to fairness. And my one own example that I can point to, that doesn't rise to the level of some of the other people here, was I've been the United States Attorney in the Southern District for 7.5 years, asked to stay on by the former president, President Trump, when he got into office. And he called me famously about 7 weeks after he was inaugurated, and I didn't take the phone call. And the reason I didn't take the phone call is that I had within my jurisdiction various matters that might have been personally relevant to the President of the United States. And even though I was technically an employee of his, I enjoyed my job and the position I had because he asked me to stay, and I served at his pleasure. I thought that it was important for purposes of fairness and the rule of law and the equal application of the law, that even the most powerful person in the country should not be able to get on the phone with a local federal prosecutor, lest people think that I made a decision because he asked me to, or I didn't make a decision because he asked me to, and that justice would be compromised. So that spirit of independence that I've been hearing on the call for the last hour or so, I think is incredibly important. You need, as I said at the outset, you need structure, you need a good constitution, you need good laws, you need good rules, but you also need good people. You know, at the end of the day, most regulations and laws, and certainly every aspect of the Constitution, is the same the day that Donald Trump got elected as it was the day that Joe Biden was sworn into office. What was different? Some of the people who were involved, some of the people who were at the top of the Justice Department, some of the people who were advising the president himself. And that's how you got unfairness. That's how you got a lot of injustice. So I'm all in favor of dedicating ourselves to reform of laws, on statutes, perhaps even constitutions. But if we don't make sure that we put good people in those places, whether elected or appointed, we're still going to be in a lot of trouble. I think I went over my time, but thank you.
It was a great answer, Preet. One question I have, and we're over time, so if you can keep your answer short if possible, that'd be terrific. Are you optimistic about the rule of law in the United States?
I am. I am because it depends on which institution you're talking about. The courts did a pretty good job, and we saw that from the date of the election to the date of the inauguration. And I think that individuals in various places didn't do their job, but many people did. And what I really hope is true, that by seeing the example of those people doing the right thing, and seeing that that's celebrated in large parts of America, and that helps keep us back on track, causes other people to want to do the right thing in the future. It's a hard thing to do what Alexander Vindman did. It's a hard thing to do what some of these folks did. But the more you see people doing it, I think the easier it becomes.
Thank you.
All right. So we're now moving on. Thank you, Preet. That was really terrific. And we're now moving on to our final topic. Danny.
So our last topic is opportunity. You cannot tell a story about America without talking about opportunity. Opportunity is the right to pursue your dreams. It's the right to fail and fail and fail until you finally succeed. It's the right to pursue happiness. And this spirit of opportunity has been with our country since the beginning. Just think Alexander Hamilton, cue the music, and it didn't stop with him. So many that were part of the founding generation, they were trying to reinvent themselves. They forged west, went over the frontier, went to California and the Pacific to make a new name for themselves, to make something of themselves. And this didn't end in 1849 with the gold rush. This is a story of creators, of inventors, of small business owners, of entrepreneurs, many of whom came from distant shores, both for freedom and for opportunity. The pursuit of happiness is alive and well in America today.
Apologies, I was on mute there. That's exactly right. And a key part of that opportunity is equality of opportunity. America's a story where you can be your own hero, but that's hard, right? I mean, over 40 million Americans are going hungry every day, and you can't do your homework if your stomach is growling at night. You can't fight for that promotion at work if you have nowhere to call home. The pursuit of happiness is alive and well, but it's our job to make it a reality for as many people as possible. Annie Duke and Daniel Lubetzky are in some ways embodiments of the American dream, and they will discuss how we leverage tenacity, innovation, and ultimately our free and open society to offer people the greatest possible opportunity.
Annie Duke is a world champion poker player and cognitive scientist, as well as a member of RDI's board. She will talk about the role opportunity has played in her own life and how we can ensure equality of opportunity through education. Annie, you're up.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a lot of people to follow. I'm so excited to be here trying to support democracy. And the thing that I think about in my life, what I write about in my books, what I've lived in my life through starting off in academics and going on to become a poker player and then back to academics and an author, is the opportunity to pursue your dreams. And I've been thinking a lot lately about kind of what it means to be wealthy. And of course, when we think about wealth, the first thing that comes to mind is money, but money is only one kind of wealth, because you can be wealthy in a whole bunch of different things like friends or love or personal fulfillment or intellectual fulfillment, variety of other things, all of which I've been lucky enough to be wealthy in. Health is a kind of wealth, time is wealth, freedom is wealth. And most importantly, for like what I've been thinking about in my life and what I've been pursuing, education is wealth. Whatever your goals are, there's one type of wealth, which is wealth of opportunity, that gives you the best chance to thrive, express the best version of who you are in all your quirks and differences and preferences. And that's something I think about so much, is how we can thrive as a society, but still preserve the differences and our different preferences and what our quirks are, and become the best versions of ourselves. This ability to achieve real progress in our lives and as a society in a way that allows each of us to express the reasonable differences among us. In fact, for those differences to make us stronger, is to endow each citizen with a wealth of opportunity, because the wealth that comes from having lots of options is really the most robust. In fact, I'd argue that all other types of wealth spring from having the options afforded by education. The future isn't promised to any of us. It's the nature of the future, actually, that it's uncertain, which is something that as a poker player I know really well, and it's a topic that I write about a lot. Industries rise and fall, technologies change, and as we know, politicians come and go. But those who are wealthy in options, the options afforded by education, are best prepared for the future, whatever form it might take. And I'm a living example of that. I'm the daughter of a PhD whose father, my grandfather, never finished middle school. Being wealthy and opportunity created by the education that my father had access to can speed progress at a blistering pace, which has been shown in my family. Education creates opportunity. Education lifts people out of poverty. But most importantly, education keeps our democracy healthy. Democracy thriving depends on its people being able to sort through what is true and what is false, to distinguish between information and misinformation, and in the worst cases, fantasy and conspiracy theories. On December 6th, we all experienced the results of not being able to tell the difference. Giving every child the opportunity to learn how to tell what is true has never been more crucial. And that's in part actually why I co-founded another organization called the Alliance for Decision Education, which is to create the opportunity for every child to learn decision-making skills in K through 12, which we currently don't do. We really believe that better decisions lead to better lives lead to a better society, and obviously that leads to a healthier democracy. Look, democracy is messy, as a previous speaker said. but its messiness is its strength, a strength found in reasonable people being afforded the freedom to express differences of opinion peacefully, allowing those opinions to flow into the public square. It's in that public square that progress marches toward the discovery of what is true and what is not. If we arm our citizens with the opportunity to learn the skills to tell the difference. Our system of liberal democracy may not always seem like it works, but it's always trying to work, and it's certainly always worth the work. Reaffirming our commitment to democracy has never been a bigger imperative, and that's why I'm so proud to be here and part of this organization. Thank you.
Thanks, Annie. And quick question, I imagine everyone knew that January 6th, but I think we probably learned it on December 6th too. So
December 6th.
Still,
yeah.
No, I think that's still equally true though, right?
I'm
Whether
sorry.
January 6th or December. Unfortunately, I think we've been learning it for months now. But so our next speaker is Daniel Lubetzky. Daniel is a social entrepreneur, an immigrant from Mexico and the son of a Holocaust survivor who founded the Kind Company and numerous nonprofits, including Peaceworks and Empatico. I think it's safe to say that his story is one of incredible success and resilience. Daniel, you're up.
Thank you, Riel and Daniel. And thanks to all the prior speakers, including incredible heroes that I'm a very, very big fan of, and I'm very grateful for their courage and leadership. You know, I think the reason Gary and Uriel wanted me to connect the dots is that I am an immigrant myself. I came from Mexico. And when I lived in Mexico, we didn't have democracy or freedom the way we have it here. When I arrived to the United States, it was actually very striking for me to see that people could express themselves the way they wanted without fear of being, jailed because they criticize a president. And it's a freedom that we should not take for granted and that we need to preserve and protect. And I'm the son of a Holocaust survivor who was liberated by American soldiers from the Dachau concentration camp. And, through those experiences, I've really come to appreciate the incredible gifts that we get as Americans that we really cannot take for granted. And I was asked to connect the dots of how I was able to build from a $10,000 company, a $5 billion company that generated thousands of jobs for Americans and helped provide factories across the country. And I think it's very much connected to the values that we've heard before. When Pastor Mawarire talked about freedom, if we didn't have free markets and freedom of ideas and freedom of thought and rule of law, we wouldn't have the best economy in the world. And where Colonel Vindeman and Mr. Taylor talked about soft values like civility and respect and kindness, let alone rule of law, these are essential pieces of our social fabric that have made America into the most extraordinary country in the world, the most powerful country in the world with the best economy in the world. And we have learned that we cannot take these things for granted, that if we do, we risk losing them. And we will only truly appreciate them once we've lost them. And so it's very, very imperative for all of us to recognize our duty to preserve those things. And Representative Comstock talked about those courageous people that from her party chose to impeach President Trump. The challenge that we have as a society is that moderates in the center that reach across the aisle will be harder to support and gain our support because the far left and the far right are going to take care of their own. Those extremist, passionate people on either side are going to continue supporting theirs. And the Democrats in the center are not going to be very excited about supporting the Republicans that stood against Mr. Trump because they might not align on their values. But then the Republican base will also not do so. And unless we find a way to build a voice for those moderates and a way to express our gratitude for people that put nation above party, we're going to find ourselves in a lot of trouble in the coming years. So I just want to encourage everybody on this call and on this participating in this to make sure that we express our gratitude for people that risk their lives to keep us safe, like Colonel Vindeman, that take courageous stances that go against partisan tribal perspectives, like Gary mentioned, and to remember that every step, every decision we reach in our lives, in our daily lives, that every single thing adds up to who we are and then what our country is.
Thank you. That's terrific. And I'm seeing some comments. It appears that the dark chocolate cherry is one of it's somebody's favorite bar of yours. So clearly you're doing something right. And now let's bring back Annie. And both of you have these really incredible stories, right? I mean, Annie, you were just weeks away from completing your PhD when you left the program to pursue poker full time. I'm sure your parents were thrilled. Daniel, you finished Stanford with a JD, but rather than pursuing big law, you decided to found a startup in the food industry. What motivated both of you to choose such, incredibly counterintuitive career paths that, quite frankly, would have probably given my mother a heart attack? And what role do you think American society played in allowing you to do so?
Annie, go first.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think it's back to what I said. My grandfather was first generation from Eastern Europe. Now, finished 6th grade. My father ended up having a PhD. I went to pursue that, but it's that path that America allows you that allowed me actually to quit the program and go and become a poker player, because I had education. So I had lots and lots of options available to me, which allowed me the freedom to go try something when I was young that I might fail at, but maybe I would succeed. I mean, much the same as a startup. You go, it gives you the freedom to try to go for something really big, knowing that because you have that education, it allows you the option to be able to pivot and survive. And that's an amazing thing. There's other places. I mean, we talk a lot about authoritarianism, but there are also places that have really strict caste systems, in which my grandfather, who graduated from middle school, my father would have been on the same path. And this is a country that allows people to move around if you actually create that optionality for people to be able to do so. So, I mean, I really feel like I am the American story. I'm an example of why living in the system that we do, with the freedom to pursue your dreams, regardless of who you were born to, is so incredibly, amazing, and something that we should be trying to preserve and hold so tightly.
My answer is that, I left the law because I was starting Peaceworks, the first company I started, and I was very passionate about using business as a force for bringing neighbors together. It's a company that started joint ventures between Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, Egyptians, Turks, and then it went into other countries and did the same thing in South Africa and in Indonesia and Sri Lanka and Mexico, with the goal of fostering joint ventures among neighbors striving to coexist. And I find that when you have a purpose that fuels you, you are much more likely to endure, not give up, and to find meaning regardless of your level of success. Because Peaceworks was not financially a tremendously successful company. It barely eked by, but it just was such a enjoyable journey for me, and it gave me as much fulfillment as Kind, which was financially far more successful, but also with a social mission of trying to build bridges with people and empathy and kindness. And the common thread in all of these things, including in what we're going to be working on in the coming months and here in America, is trying to build bridges among people. So what happened to some of us in the past, to our parents in the past, won't happen again here or anywhere else.
That was terrific, both Annie and Daniel. Now it is time for all of the speakers from tonight to come back on for a quick round of audience Q&A.
All right, so it'll take, I think, just a moment to get everyone's video and audio back. And thank you everyone for bearing with us. I know that we're about 15 minutes over, and I hope that you'll forgive us that extra time. I really think the conversations we've had tonight have just been, beyond my wildest expectations. So I really cannot thank our, distinguished guests enough for joining. But for those, and I hope many folks here can stay for an additional 8 to 10 minutes for our final Q&A, which is based a lot on the questions that we've been seeing in the chat. And what we've done essentially is we've tried to pull together a number of different questions that relate to one another. And I'd like to remind all the speakers again that this is going to be a lightning round. So do please keep your answers to about 30 seconds. And in that way we can make sure we can ask a few questions, and most folks will have a chance to speak. So, our first question is about how we can reform and protect democracy. So, we've seen the flaws in our democratic process, and we've seen how they can be exploited, both to, in some ways perpetuate minority rule, in other ways to have sort of the elected officials choose their voters rather than having voters choose their elected officials. So what do you guys see as being the best reforms that we can pass, whether laws or efforts within civic society that could update and renew our democracy?
Maybe I'll just start by saying we should have higher expectations for our elected officials. The bar has sunk so low at the moment that you could say anything and still not face the accountability required to remove you from office. I think that's probably the biggest adjustment between the previous administration, the current administration. It's reestablishing the norms that have kept this country moving forward and incrementally improving the lot of all Americans. Right now, I think that one of the first things we could do is seek accountability. I think, as Preet mentioned, the courts will probably take this issue up. It's something that I call up even well before January 6th. I couldn't really even, I knew it could get bad. I didn't quite see, an attempted coup unfolding, but there has to be some form of accountability, and that and the 9/11 like commission that Speaker Pelosi is calling for helps move us in that direction. But we also, frankly, have as individuals responsibilities to have higher expectations for our leaders. That's something that each one of us could do ourselves.
And I'm just going to add, and higher expectations from ourselves. I think we as citizens need to recognize that we can't just wait for politicians to do it, that we set the tone, and with our actions and with our leadership, we need to teach ourselves and our fellow citizens that we have a power, and with that power, a responsibility to expect that and to demand that and to take small actions. And we did that in the Middle East with the One Voice movement, and we need to do that here with trying to build more of a social fabric of responsibility.
Totally agree with you, Daniel. That was going to be one of my points, that we have to be a society that teaches every citizen that their voice matters, particularly the young people coming up, because what one generation tolerates in terms of silence or in terms of inaction, the next generation embraces as culture. You don't want that for the future.
Can I make one pitch for oversight? That's something that people in power never want. And our former president probably is on the end of the spectrum for being hostile to oversight. And we have so many things that we complain about. I think rightly, some things get lost in the mix, like inspectors general at various agencies who are there to protect us from waste, fraud, and abuse, and from outright corruption. They were fired far too easily by President Trump, and they can be fired very easily by the next president too, and the president after that, whether they're Democrat or Republican. And so I would like to see, in a concrete way, the shoring up of protections for people like inspectors general, special counsels, and others.
Aurel, I'm going to take this back and just say that this notion that has been stated a couple of times about an individual can make a difference is unbelievably important and powerful. And frankly, we can see, we probably have folks in our own lives that have done that, but we also have some people on this panel with us today that, their voices have really changed, transformed, maybe even the course of, each individual can make a contribution that's transformative. And that's probably one of the most important things I'd like to, maybe to pass on, that you can do that from inside government. You can do that from outside of government. This is not the kind of country where we're limited and that we have to fear for our lives like you do in the Soviet Union, North Korea, Zimbabwe. In this country, you can make a difference. And I'll go back to my Here Right Matters claim. I still stand by it.
I'd like to make a pitch for, I mean, this is on some of what Gary has said. There were norms that had to do with transparency that need to be codified into law. Because as I think about how can you expect people to make really good decisions about who are representing them, if they don't know what the truth is, it's very hard for them then to make a good decision. And certain things like, what are your tax returns? Who are your connections to? Who do you owe money to? These kinds of questions that prior to Trump coming in office, people would obviously release that information to the public so that the public could make an informed decision. Obviously, that kind of went out the window with Trump. And then you saw other politicians following suit and refusing to disclose information that prior to that, it had been the norm to disclose. So I would love to see that made into law, that you can't run for office unless you tell people what your tax situation is, who do you owe money to, who are you connected to, so that people can make informed decisions about who is representing them.
And that should be passed quickly, because the Democrats should be able to pass that, but that really is something that should have strong bipartisan support. And that would probably be the quickest and surest way that you won't have Donald Trump try to run for office again.
Oh, I think we should not make a mistake by considering current political system as a part of founding principles. American democracy was a success story because it could always adjust to meet the challenges of a time. And 21st century, the era of social media and this instant communication requires creative thinking. And two major political parties, they don't have perpetual license to be around. This is not a part of American Constitution. And if any political party is standing on the way, or both, I believe, American public should look for the future, freeing itself from the traditions that have been established over the last 100 years or so.
Thank you, Gary, and for everyone's responses for that question. We have another one from the audience. It's a combination of several, actually. How do we engage with and de-radicalize our neighbors who spew conspiracy theories and live in alternate realities? So in other words, how do we de-radicalize America? Didn't say the question would be easy.
I'm going to jump in on that one, and let me tell you why. I spent years focused on counter ISIS and countering Al Qaeda, and there's a lot of similarities between the fight against international terrorists and what we're seeing with domestic terrorism. Now, I know that's the most extreme end of the spectrum. I'm talking about people who've so radicalized that they've moved to violence. But one of the most important aspects that we've learned since 9/11 and our experience with counterterrorism is that community involvement is the most essential tripwire to prevent things from breaking bad. And in fact, in a study that we did of terrorism cases during the surge of ISIS online inspired and radicalized plots, what we found was more than half of them had a community nexus. And that's why we were able to stop the plots. A neighbor, a friend, a family member, a confidential human source, someone in the community that interrupted that radicalization process or cycle, raised the flag, sounded the alarm, and said, this is a problem. Now, the issue is in the past 4 years, we've had a White House that did not care about domestic terrorism and the radicalization of violence we're seeing from the really charged rhetoric in Washington. So what should the Biden administration do about that? Now, again, I'm talking about that most extreme end of the spectrum. What they should do is really emphasize community awareness. It sounds banal, it sounds boring, but it turns out to be the most important thing we can do to stop these things from getting violent before it's too late. And that requires awareness, and the president getting out there, speaking with authority, and making the American people more alert to these threats and these dangers. But just short of that, I think it really means earlier engagement with our friends and colleagues before they go too far down the rabbit hole of radicalization, that we need to actually stop a violent plot.
Let me just chime in there with what Miles is saying. I find, because I come from a background where our work was about organizing people at the grassroots to stand up and speak truth to power, because we discovered, in fact, one of our biggest statements when we organized the protests, the shutdowns we did, was, if we cannot cause the politicians to change, then we must inspire the citizen to be bold. There is no substitute for reaching people where they are and beginning to teach people to reach out to each other and finding common ground. The biggest challenge that I find America is in at this point is that people are so divided and are so far apart from each other that they're failing to find their way back to each other. It's so important that we begin to work, or there begins to be a model or a way in which people can start finding the common ground. What do we agree about? What is it that we love about our nation that both you and I are willing to work towards? And I think that, for me, would be an important thing that needs to happen. You cannot substitute reaching people on the ground where they are and starting to build those breaches back, or those walls back where they've been breached.
Just to follow one quick word on what Pastor Mawarire said, that is around values. And we really need to remind people that we have a lot more in common that meets the eye, and it is those things that Colonel Vindeman and Miles Taylor and Representative Comstock were talking about, all these things that we took for granted, that the overwhelming majority of Americans actually do appreciate and do care about: civility, respect, kindness, that nobody's above the law, that freedom matters, that democracy matters, that we want fairness in our lives, that we want to take care of those in greatest need and not leave people behind. Though there's enormous amount of consensus on those things from the left, center, and right, we need to remind people about those values because they'll agree on those, and then start holding ourselves accountable to them. And like one of the panelists spoke earlier, not allow someone from a political party to get a pass just because they are from our party, that we need to use those values as a screen for how we're going to hold people accountable.
So Yunmi or Preet, do either of you have anything to add here?
So the only thing I wanted to add is that actually I don't think it's my place to really tell people how to really de-radicalize extreme groups. But the thing that it shocked me the most is actually when I met people, that some people is like, oh, I don't want to go certain down states because those people are too radicalized on the right side. And some people like, oh, I'm in New York, it's like, oh, those who are all radicalized. And it just really confused me, like, in life in America right now, most of things are not like life and death. Some things in other countries are life-death decisions. And in a way that I feel like just media is, I know as much I don't want to blame media, but really, as we say, like really don't show a lot of the goodness in people. And, I just really confused, like why America is it. I came to America when Trump was running the election, and I asked people like, is this how normal America is? And people are like, nope, it's not. It's a very special time you came into this country. So I don't know what the country was like before, but all I can see is that people can chill and just be grateful what we got. Still, like we have so much to be grateful for. We are still the best country in the world, even not the perfect country, but still the best country. And I think that's what I hope Americans to know, that you guys are awesome, and I hope you guys can get united someday. Yeah, so that's all.
I love that.
I think it's going to be important to have that any of the investigations, whether it's the 9/11 type investigation on January 6th or the domestic extremism, that it really involves a lot of Republicans so that they can kind of confront their own party on where these elements are and how they needed to be rooted out. And we just need to have that kind of detail where, get the phone records, get the bank records, follow the money, and do that kind of really tough investigating to unwind this and to show the public what's going on with this.
Perfect. Thank you. And so for the final question, before we wrap up here, this one is mostly towards Congresswoman Comstock and Miles, although certainly everyone else, please, also feel free to chime in. And we've sort of flirted around with this question for a little bit, but so now just to kind of take it on directly, how can we reform, but how can the GOP be reformed moving forward? How should it be reformed moving forward in your view?
Congresswoman, I'll let you go first.
Congresswoman, I think you're on mute.
I think it's candidate by candidate. Start with supporting the people who stood up, but then one of the things I'm working on is finding candidates on the state level, on the federal level, finding people to primary some of these more egregious offenders within the party. And it's not going, it'll be a rocky road. It's not going to be smooth, but I think, candidates make a difference. And when you see good people, and for example, if you're in a district that's really red, you may be a Democrat, but or if you're in Wyoming, vote for Liz Cheney over whatever crackpot's going to run against her, even if you're a Democrat, do that in a primary, because, a Republican's going to win a district like that. You're either going to have a sane one or you're going to have this crazy, because right now it isn't conservative versus moderate really within the party. It's conservative versus QAnon, conservative versus crazy. And we need to get sanity of sorts back.
Yeah, I'd add to that. I echo everything that the Congresswoman says, and she's been a huge voice in trying to take the GOP back to the center right. And that's really what we're trying to do. And, some of you may have seen that the other week we convened a meeting, a group of us convened a meeting of conservative thought leaders, some of whom are on this call, to talk about how we fortify the center. I mean, look, a number of you have probably read Jonathan Haidt's really great book he's written a lot about tribalism in American politics and our tribal instincts, which have really amplified the extremes of both parties. What we need to do is create a tribe in the middle. And tactically, that may be a new party, it may be a movement. There are a lot of ways to go about it, but strategically, what we need is to fortify the middle. And so we're putting a lot of this momentum that came from animosity towards the Trump administration into how do we reform our politics going forward? How do we get a GOP that's not extremist? How do we really create a center right that's rational? As the Congresswoman said, we want real Republicans. We want sane Republicans out there, but they may be independents as well. And that's what we have to be open-minded about, is supporting candidates who aren't necessarily under the old banner of the grand old party, right? We need a grand new party. And we're looking at ways to do that. So we're really involved in that conversation. And I hope in the coming weeks, we've got some good announcements to make to some of you folks.
All right. Well, we're now about 30 minutes over. So I think it'll be a good moment for us to kind of start wrapping up here. So first, I want to thank, of course, our incredible speakers. I mean, this has been, I think a truly unique experience and a uniquely I think a unique combination of people, right? I mean, it's not, I certainly haven't been a part of a whole lot of events that, brought together North Korean defectors with Zimbabwean activists and Soviet defectors and, American political leaders and business leaders and so forth. I mean, it's truly an incredible collection of people. And so I want to thank all of you. And of course, I want to thank our audience for joining us. Now, before we sign off, I do want to try to see if we can maybe, spend just a few seconds here at the end, pulling together a few takeaways. And I know there's any number of takeaways that I think you can come away from this with. And I also know that when we were putting together this event, there was a certain amount of controversy, and that's okay. But here at RDI, we firmly believe that when we see someone exemplify civic duty, we should applaud it, regardless of which side of the aisle it comes from.
That's right, Uriel. And I'm just going to ad-lib for a second. My own takeaway from this event is we need to do more events featuring people that are speaking positively about American democracy. There's so much negativity, so much filth, so much just where, the last several years have been terrible. And it's just inspiring to see people who have risked their lives, who have sacrificed their careers, who've done so much for democracy, speak out and speak up together. So that's my personal takeaway. Another takeaway, I think, is people in unfree regimes risk their lives for 1/100th of the freedoms that we take for granted here in the United States. And so at RDI, we believe it's our duty to defend and nurture those freedoms that we've developed here over the last 245 years.
And ultimately, that's the mission of our organization. And we'd love for all of you here to get more involved. And so I'd like to offer just a few action items, that if you're interested in getting more involved, you can take part in. So first, join our new online community on Facebook. We'll be putting up a slide in just a moment, which will have all the details. We'll also be sending out a lot of this information over email. Now, we know that the platform, Facebook, isn't ideal, but this will be a placeholder for now while we identify a more effective community platform for the long term.
And keep an eye out for our future events. We have a really exciting one on the horizon with Congressman Ro Khanna about the tension between free speech and misinformation.
Apologies. And last but not least, if you're so inclined, I really hope that you'll consider going to our website and donating to enable us to create new videos, other educational content, and continue building the type of community of reasonable people motivated by the values that have propelled America forward, and with some work can continue to do so. So again, I'm really incredibly excited to be here today, and I want to thank everyone here for joining us. Now, despite being, over half an hour over now, we're not going to close out right away. So if you'd like to stick around, what we'll do is we're going to play a few of our favorite videos that we received during the hashtag Renew Democracy Challenge campaign. But of course, everyone else, you're welcome to go along your way. I know on the East Coast, it's dinner time. And for Gary and a few others, it's God knows what hour of the night. So again, thank you, everyone. And, best of luck. And I'm looking forward to seeing you at our next event.
Have a good night, everybody.
Hi, this is Morgan Fairchild. The Renew Democracy Initiative asked me to do a little short video on what democracy means to me. The reality of America has never lived up to the dream of America. That dream that drew people from all over the world, because in America, who you were, the character, not the color of your skin, but the willingness to work hard, your willingness to learn, your willingness to achieve the most excellent person you could be. That's what mattered. And I'd like to see us go back to that basic kind of value again, incorporating everyone, everyone's ideas, everyone's hopes and dreams, and fairness in our system. That's what democracy is to me. I'd like to see the reality of America become a hell of a lot closer to that dream of America.
Hello, my name is Melvin Edwards, and I'm here in my home state visiting this weekend, home state of Texas, as you can tell. And I just wanted to give a short video about what democracy means to me. When I was doing family research for my book, I discovered that my great-great-great-grandfather was born a slave just outside of the cradle of democracy in Washington, D.C., and he was sold to a family here in Texas. He was able to vote just 2 years after he was freed as a slave. But unfortunately, before he died, that vote was taken away from him. And for 100 years, none of my ancestors was able to vote again. My parents were able to vote for the first time 1 year before I was born. There's no way I'm ever going to take voting for granted. And there's also no way I'm going to sit by and let an autocrat or his sycophants try to take away that vote from other people or not count legally cast ballots. So I stand with Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, his twin brother, his father, and his wife. When they say that right matters here, right matters to me.
When growing up in the Soviet Union, I loved to read. One of my favorite books was Hobbit by Tolkien. The Russian translation said the next part, titled The Lord of the Rings, would be coming soon. I didn't know, though, that someone in the Communist Party, for some unexplainable reason, decided that Hobbit was good for kids, but The Lord of the Rings was not. So I spent my whole childhood waiting for the book that was kiboshed by the Communist Party. I don't want my kids or grandkids grow up in a reality where some uncle in a gray suit somewhere in Moscow or elsewhere decides these things for them.
Hi, thank you so much, Sophie, for nominating me to do the Renew Democracy Challenge. So, democracy is a system of government that gives power to the people by, for example, your vote. To me, that means that every single person has a voice, everyone's voice matters, and your voice matters just as much as anyone else's. In the US, we have a liberal democracy and a constitutional democracy, which means that we all have rights and liberties guaranteed to us by the Constitution. So not only does your voice matter, but you matter. Every single person has a voice and a value, neither of which can be taken away from you. Of course, we haven't reached that ideal. This country has a lot of problems and a problematic history. But I will say that all Americans, for the most part, can agree that we should uphold democracy, that is an ideal, and that's what we're committed to. And if democracy is that one thing that unites us, then it's definitely something that we have to uphold, preserve, and strengthen.
The problem with human beings is that we want to be individuals, just me, my freedom, I stand, I make my decisions, I run my life. And we want somehow to have all the advantages of living as a group, as a social community, as being able to provide health and education and defense and just to look after ourselves and to belong. And it's that tension, being individual and yet wanting to belong, that democracy and only democracy seems to be able to satisfy. It's inefficient, it's cumbersome, it's lazy, it's fluffy, its edges are all confused, and every time it makes an achievement, there's some drawback, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But it's the best system we have. It allows us to be ourselves. And I think we should celebrate inefficiency. We should celebrate the fact that it's a coughing stop-start sort of a vehicle. It's not a smooth Ferrari like a dictatorship, and it's not a great rumbling tank like a communist paradise. It's democracy, the best hope for mankind.